The Point of Pertinence. It was a foggy morning in Sussex when Meredith Bronte finally reached the point, both metaphorically and geographically, that she had been navigating toward for months. The rolling hills of the countryside, verdant and mysterious, had been both her escape and her classroom, offering her insights that were profoundly pertinent to her life's purpose, though she scarcely understood them yet. Meredith was an editor at a reputable publishing house, tasked with transforming manuscripts into polished works of art, a process she both adored and dreaded. Her mind was often burdened with the weight of stories that were not her own, yet she handled each one as though it was a vital fragment of her existence. The quiet of Sussex was supposed to offer her respite, a sanctuary to escape the relentless voices of fictional characters. But as it happens, peace has a peculiar way of surfacing thoughts and emotions one might rather leave buried. On the last Friday of October, Meredith had decided to set out for a ramble, aiming to reach a local landmark, an ancient oak tree rumored to have inspired poets and thinkers alike. Legend said that those who reached it were granted clarity, an acute and almost divine insight into their own lives, the sort of insight that would make even the most jumbled hearts come to rest. As she walked, her mind wandered back to her work. Lately, her decisions had felt clouded, and the manuscripts she reviewed seemed weightier than before. She was beginning to sense that these stories held fragments of her life, parts of herself that she had inadvertently spilled into the pages of others' worlds. And yet, she found herself hesitating, caught between the roles of an objective editor and a subjective wanderer. "Gets to the point," she murmured, stepping over a particularly gnarled root. It was something her father used to say whenever she faltered in a tale, whenever she drifted too far from the heart of a story. But what was the point of her own story? She found herself grappling with the very essence of meaning, of pertinence. Perhaps she wasn't here just to make sense of others' lives on paper, but to understand her own life, to see where she was going beyond the pages she edited. After hours of walking, Meredith finally reached the oak. Its trunk was thick and weathered, and its branches stretched skyward as though attempting to breach the heavens. She reached out a hand and placed it against the bark, feeling the rough texture beneath her fingers, and in that moment, a curious sense of grounding took hold. "To the point," she whispered again, this time to the tree, half hoping it would respond. But only the faint rustling of leaves answered her, dancing in the wind. And yet, in that silence, she felt a stirring within, an awareness, perhaps, of how close she had come to understanding. Meredith sank onto a nearby stone, her mind drifting back to the manuscripts awaiting her return. One story in particular loomed in her thoughts, an autobiography written by an elderly woman who had woven tales of loss and love with the finesse of a seasoned writer. The woman's prose had been laced with an acute awareness of her own mortality, each chapter a meditation on what was truly pertinent and what was merely a distraction. The manuscript had unnerved Meredith, revealing in its pages an insight so profound that it felt almost accusatory. It demanded a sincerity she found unsettling, compelling her to examine her own life with the same brutal honesty. As an editor, she had been trained to identify pertinent details, to discard what was unnecessary. But had she applied that same discernment to herself? With a deep breath, Meredith closed her eyes, allowing the cool Sussex air to wash over her. She realized in that moment that getting to the point was less about stripping away and more about uncovering. It was a journey inward, a trek through the tangled underbrush of one's own heart and mind. When she opened her eyes, she felt lighter, as though a veil had lifted. The ancient oak stood before her, silent yet knowing, a testament to time and resilience. She rose, her gaze steady, and began her walk back to the village. As she descended the hill, the weight of others' stories began to ease from her shoulders. She was no longer merely an editor, tasked with finding pertinence in others' lives. She was, in that moment, the author of her own. By the time she reached her cottage, dusk had settled over the countryside. The fog had lifted, revealing a sky scattered with stars. Meredith entered her quiet home, took out the manuscript, and began reading once more. But this time she read with a different heart, one attuned not just to the lives of others, but also quietly, poignantly, to her own. And there, in the quiet of her cottage, she understood. Getting to the point wasn't about erasing parts of oneself. It was about embracing them fully, acknowledging the messy, beautiful sprawl of a life that resisted simplification. And with that, she began to write her own story.